Welcome, Dr. Shah and Brenda. So nice to have you both here.
Well, thank you so much for having us.
You know, I could have gone on and on with both of you with all of your credentials and contributions to the plant-based world and so forth. And I really just want to get down to interviewing and having questions. So I do have a list of all the other kinds of things that you guys have done that are awesome. And I'm going to put them in the show notes so that people can, if they can take the time to see that we really do have two very special people with us today that are highly qualified to tell us about plant-based nutrition, especially with children, and to answer questions that you guys might have. So as far as this book, Nourish, which I think, I mean, you must have been toying with a lot of different titles, but Nourish, I mean, there you are. That just says it all. What prompted you to want to put this type of book out there that's much needed?
Well, thank you, Amy, so much for having us. It really is a pleasure to be chatting with you. Yeah, so Nourish it's been sort of a labor of love. Brenda and I, we actually met at one of the plant-based nutrition conferences several years ago. I think it's going on like 5 years ago now, and formed a friendship and decided to collaborate on this book. For me, it was just such an honor to be able to work with someone like Brenda. And I think, I mean, I'll let her say it, but I think that she definitely saw the need for a book that was in support of families. And the title Nourish, I think for us, it reflects many different elements of nourishing. So it's about, first and foremost, nourishing our children, providing them with a healthy, joyful, delicious way of eating, but it's also about, nourishing our planet and extending compassion to one another, and also for, for animals. And so, yeah, it is a very all-encompassing title, and we very purposely chose that because it has many, many layers of meaning.
Yeah, and for me, I've been very aware that this has been something that has been missing in the literature for a while, is a book that is fairly comprehensive guidebook for parents and for health professionals who are wanting correct information to help support parents. And we didn't really have anything, and I've been thinking about doing something like this, and always wanted to do it with a pediatrician, and Reshma was just the best partner ever. So I feel very, very fortunate to, that our paths crossed the way they did. I mean, we just met by chance on an airplane. She was sitting beside me on the way to the Plantrition conference. And we just started talking and found out we were going to the same conference. And that's how our friendship started. And the funniest thing is, my friend and I, we thought she'll take an aisle seat and I'll take a window seat, and then the middle will be free. We can put all our stuff there. But the plane was packed and Reshma was the person in between us. So it was just meant to be. Absolutely.
I would think so. And I mean, you probably during these conferences, you get to meet a lot of physicians. In my world, I'm always having people ask me, do you know a physician that is either plant-based or just understands and is willing to work with someone that's plant-based? So for you to run across a pediatrician that is embracing the lifestyle and incorporating it into her practice, and then just the universe just plopped her
right there
in a confined place.
It was great. It was great. And just so people know, 10-15 years ago, when the American College of Lifestyle started their huge conferences and the Plantrition Project, when they began, these were tiny little, I think with American College of Lifestyle Medicine, it was like 100 people. Now they have to shut it down at 1,500. There are a lot of physicians and other healthcare providers who are very, very interested in plant-based diets because they're seeing results. And so it's getting more and more exciting all the time in the medical world.
Yeah, and I mean, what a gift if if you can find a physician that at least understands the lifestyle and doesn't question why your hands are orange and wants to run tests on you because maybe your white blood cell count is low or something. So yeah, it's
Oh,
I mean, we have encountered, in my family, we've had encountered physicians in that way. My husband, he lost about 120 pounds on this when he started this
wow.
lifestyle, and well, it was a great story because it only took him, well, he did it in a year, and he had 2 rotacuff surgeries, so he really was pretty sedentary. So we had his physician retired, and he had to get a new physician, and the physician actually did not believe him that he lost that weight, and that's how it happened. So yeah, it's nice to have but I mean, it's something that if nobody is aware of this lifestyle and the health benefits, that they just can't comprehend that something so simple could be that way. And so, like I said, it's just so nice to have physician and then a registered dietitian. I've run across many RDs that even now they are talking about complete proteins because of way back in their training, and somehow they haven't been updated. That's not something to be concerned about. So it's really great that you guys have collaborated on this wonderful book that you wrote. So so what do you think the main reasons are that parents are choosing to raise children on a plant-based diet?
I think there are a variety of reasons, actually. One of the things that's been so wonderful for me to see oftentimes is when the change is actually sparked by the child. I think, today children are much more concerned about the environment and the ethics of how we raise farm animals. The children that will come to the parents saying, I'm interested in being vegetarian or being vegan. And then when a parent is able to sort of support a child and allow them to sort of explore that, it's really a beautiful thing. And the child can actually be the momentum or the spark for change in the family. So that's one thing. And then I think with the rising rates of a lot of the chronic diseases we've seen, I think parents are looking for a way to feed their children that's health promoting and is going to lower their risk of many of these chronic diseases. But I also think that parents are wanting to be able to feed their children in a way that's sort of joyful and centered around creating connection around their dinner tables. And we try to sort of weave all of those concepts into the book. So it's the 3 key issues that everyone in the plant-based community knows about. It's about health, it's about sustainability, and it's about compassion. And one of the things that I've seen over and over again is that even though someone may be drawn to a plant-based way of eating because of one of these factors, you begin to learn about the other 2, and then it just sort of becomes a win-win-win situation.
Right. Well, I know that it was in 2012 that I adopted this lifestyle. So my children were grown and they were able to make choices for themselves as far as what they wanted to do. Of course, I bombarded them with all the knowledge that I was accumulating and wanted them to watch all the different documentaries with me. And they caught on a lot faster. And they were like, we caught on. Maybe you need to make a website or something.
Put your energy somewhere else besides us, right?
But when I think about if I was back in time when they were younger, or even when I was pregnant, and if I knew about this lifestyle then, and had been embracing it, and then became pregnant, or I think I would have been a little nervous about, being pregnant and I did breastfeed. So lactating or having a developing child, I think I would have been a little bit nervous and not to have a resource, because obviously most of the doctors aren't familiar with the lifestyle, not to have a resource to be reassured that this is not your life you're changing somebody else's that you're responsible for. So, and I'm sure that a lot of people that are in our audience, if they have children in this age range that they can influence, that they may either be concerned or their families or physicians may be concerned about, Is a plant-based diet safe and adequate for children? So what do you guys have to say?
Yeah, well, I'll start out. First of all, you are very apt to encounter a few raised eyebrows if you say you're pregnant and not consuming any animal products. I mean, if you're lacto-ovo vegetarian, nobody thinks anything of it. But if you're vegan, they do, and there's concern about, in pregnancy, B12 and choline and iodine and iron and all of these different things. But usually, I think you can get them on board when you're pregnant and lactating. But it's a whole different story with infants and toddlers, and people are very concerned because, and the thing to understand is that, the number one priority for infants and children is adequate growth and development. Period. That is, I mean, we've got to ensure that children don't develop nutritional deficiencies, their brains grow properly and their bodies grow properly, and that they are well nourished. And in contrast with adults, the number one priority is to reduce risk of the diseases that kill most of us. Heart disease and type 2 diabetes and cancers and, overweight and obesity and all of these things. And so the priority shifts between, especially young children and adults. And so that's why I think health professionals are so concerned, because, most of our nutrition education resources are not focused on people eating plant predominant or plant exclusive diets. They're designed to support omnivores. And so a lot of health professionals who, first of all, often don't receive very much nutrition education, the resources they have are very much designed for omnivores. So they themselves lack the resources. And I think that's one of the key reasons we wrote Nourish, is to provide them with a resource that they could rely on. One of the wonderful resources also that you can share with health professionals to help alleviate some of these concerns is the 2016 Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics position statement on vegetarian diets. And in that statement, they very, very clearly say that plant predominant, which is, a vegetarian diets, or plant exclusive, which are vegan diets, that are well planned, are safe and adequate at every stage of the life cycle, during pregnancy, lactation, infancy, childhood, adolescence, for athletes. They, basically can be done to be suitable for everyone. And that resource, because it's coming from the largest professional dietetic association on the planet, is usually well received by health professionals. And so they usually appreciate, seeing it and knowing that, yes, it is an acceptable thing to do when it's done properly.
Wow, that is powerful, because I think that people, either they go to the doctor and don't say anything, and just hope that nobody even mentions it or notices anything odd about things, or they bring in a book, from some vegan author. And of course, I'm sure that these doctors, I think a lot of them get frustrated when their patients try to diagnose themselves and go on the internet and say, well, Google says this, or bring in a book and say, well, this vegan doctors, or whoever says this. So having something that is respected like that is really powerful. That's such a good resource. I'm glad that you shared. So,
and Reshma has a good story about Dr. Shah has a good story about the, how physicians can respond and.
Yeah, so I think I think this is a story you're thinking about. I was working one weekend seeing patients in the clinic, and there was a really lovely young family that came in for their newborn visit. They had just been discharged from the hospital, and then you could tell they were like a young, shy couple, very overwhelmed, really, just bringing this new baby home. And I spent some time just talking to them and, supporting mom and breastfeeding. And they just looked sort of anxious to me. And I just inquired about her well-being and how she was doing. And is she, maintaining like her healthy diet and all of this. And she sort of looked up at me towards the end of the visit and really reluctantly, just almost very, very barely speaking up, saying, well, we're vegan. And she felt like she had to withhold this information because, and I said, well, that's wonderful. I'm vegan too. And her eyes just lit up. And she's like, you are? And she basically told me that all throughout her pregnancy, every healthcare provider that she had encountered, from the midwives to the physicians to the nurse, everyone had basically, in some way, shape, or form, told her that eating a vegan diet was dangerous for her pregnancy and for her baby. And so she decided that she really was going to do exactly what you said, kind of keep it to herself. And the reason that it's important is because she actually did need some support in terms of specific supplementation and things like that. And the main reason that Brenda and I wrote this book is we want people who are plant-based or even plant-curious, just sort of exploring, to have the resources to be able to do this successfully and safely. And so, a little bit of conversation, and her regular pediatrician I happen to know, and we had a lovely conversation, and he was really grateful for, the additional resources and information that I provided. And so I would say that even if you happen to not find a healthcare provider that themselves is vegan or plant-based, it's important to be sort of open in your conversations, because whether it's about supplementation or certain testing, and Brenda and I are going to be speaking at a medical society in March to a group of practitioners that are not plant-based or vegan. And it's important to have these conversations with the general medical community, because even if the physician herself is not plant-based or vegan, she no doubt will be caring for patients that are. So it's important for them to also have the tools and resources to be able to advise patients appropriately.
Well, that's wonderful. And it seems like this book has a lot of resources as well.
Oh, I've had many people say that they've given it to their pediatrician. So it's
yes.
I think that's a great idea, because it's not just a book. It's a reference, a form of reference. So it's not just something that you would have to read from cover to cover and start in the beginning and work your way through. You could look things up and highlight things and show them. So, wow, this is something that I've run across a lot of people who are struggling with things like that. And I think, like, for example, even people that aren't vegan, as far as going to a pediatrician, breastfed babies, I think, I'm not a physician, but I think that it maybe, at least in the beginning, they don't grow as quickly as bottle-fed babies. But yet, what are the growth charts based on?
right.
So I think, go ahead if you want to.
Yeah, and so a lot of the charts are based on formula-fed babies, but I think it's pretty common knowledge. Pediatricians know that the growth parameters of breastfed babies tend to be slightly different, and it's really important to just sort of track that child's growth over time. So you're absolutely right. I think having some knowledge about nutrition, whether it's for breastfeeding infants that are breastfed, or patients that are following a variety of diets from vegan or vegetarian to even omnivorous, having some basic information and knowledge about nutritional requirements through the growing years is essential.
Right.
Yeah, and it's important also to remember that children, regardless of the diet that they follow, a lot of people get scared off by the term. Brenda was talking about the position statement from the Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics, the words appropriately planned or well planned. And one of the things that we talk about in the book is that all diets for children need to be well planned. I've seen kids with iron deficiency anemia. I've seen kids with rickets from vitamin D deficiency. So, and these were not plant-based children. So the idea that somehow if you eat a diet that contains animal foods, that you automatically will meet your nutritional requirements without any thought or planning is not true.
No, and of course, parents who are feeding an omnivorous diet, often the standard omnivorous diet in North America is a diet that's excessive. It's based on processed foods. The vast majority of calories come from processed foods, processed meats, sugars, and refined grains, and that is not in any stretch of the imagination an optimal diet. I can actually recall when I was this is many years ago, but as a public health nutritionist, going into a home where the baby had, the baby was about a year old, and I could tell it wasn't milk in the bottle, and the nipple had been cut off the top, and I asked the mother what was in the bottle. Well, it was a McDonald's hamburger that she had blended up because she didn't want to mess with her baby eating the hamburger. So she blended up the burger, and she did that with all the food, was blending it up in the bottle. And so there are a lot of ways that parents can really blow it when they're feeding a small child, regardless of the dietary pattern. There's just different things that become more important if you're plant-based, and there are other things that are more important if you're eating a more standard diet. So it's just the focus changes, that's all.
Yeah, that's frustrating that so many of them are overfed and undernourished, and people are can be critical of this plant-based lifestyle, but yet they're not questioning about what they're doing, not having a well-designed diet for the omnivores. Yes, you're right. And I think, and of course, another hurdle, though, is not just the physicians, but it's the family members. Here, drop the kids off at grandma, but they're not going to eat these things, and these are the things that they're going to eat. And maybe the relatives being concerned about well, of course, protein. That's the big thing, right? And especially with a developing child, I mean, that would be a big concern. So what can we talk about?
Yeah, it's so interesting because with protein, it's probably one of the nutrients we have to worry the least about in children's diets. There was actually a study done quite recently, 2019, called the Vici study from Germany. And this was a study with a fair number of children. It was not just 6 or 7 children. It was a do you remember, Reshma? Probably 300. Yeah, a couple. It was a good number of children, and the children were vegan, vegetarian, or omnivorous. And what they found was that, just so people know, the RDA for protein for 1 to 3 year olds is 1.05 grams per kilogram body weight. And these children, the omnivores, were getting 2.7 grams. The vegetarians were getting 2.3, and the vegans were getting 2.4. So they were all over double what they actually needed for protein. Now, it is true that when protein is in a plant, you digest less of it because some of it is bound to the fiber and ends up going right through the system and gets excreted in the stool. And so often we say that it's not a bad idea to increase the protein for 1 to 3 year olds by about 30%. So instead of 13 grams that's recommended, they'd be looking at about 17 grams and about 15 to 20% for children that are older than that. And but it's just not a huge amount of protein. If you think the RDA for 1 to 3 year olds is 13 grams, well, you would easily get that in a moderate sized serving of tofu, like a quarter cup or something like that. So it's not very difficult to meet protein requirements. And on average, children, omnivorous children, there was a study in Australia showing that they get 3 times what's recommended. It's the same in the United States, and in Germany it was over double. So just not as much of an issue as many people think. That having been said, it is important that kids aren't living on refined grains. So, and it does tend to be a favorite for children. So they like spaghetti, they like bread, they like, all of those kinds of refined grain products. So it is important that we're getting the legumes in there, some lentils and beans and It's, you know, some tofu and those kinds of things are very, very helpful to get all of the essential amino acids in and to help children meet their protein requirements. And the other piece is that a lot of the non-dairy milks are extremely low in protein, so maybe a gram per cup, whereas cow's milk is you know, about 8 grams. Soy milk is fairly similar; it's about 6 to 8 grams. And then there's this pea protein milk that's about, you know, often 9 or 10 grams. So it you know, for children that are a little bit picky eaters, it would make sense to select a non-dairy milk that is a little bit higher in protein.
That makes a lot of sense. And in a quarter cup, I mean, that's really nothing. And then if you could take the beans or the tofu, you could blend them and make them into a cheesy kind of sauce or a hummus or something. And, you know, the child could easily get that amount. And I mean, we don't think, I remember as a child that, you know, well, I was a very picky eater, and I also didn't eat very large portions. I got filled up very quickly, and my mom used to give me a big glass of milk with my food, and she finally realized that I was drinking the milk and preloading with the milk, and then I was just full. So she cut down on that, which I guess was a good thing for me. But
yeah, it's actually recommended that, you know, there's a limit on milk, because milk is it can cause constipation. It's one of the biggest causes of iron deficiency anemia, if not the biggest cause in children, because it's so low in iron and it's fairly high in calories, and so it can crowd out other foods with more, you know, of the iron and all of these other nutrients that are important as well. So Reshma might want to chime in on that one.
I mean, I've seen this in my practice a lot. Kids drinking way more milk than is good for them. And in addition to the things that Brenda mentioned in terms of constipation and anemia, it's also a leading cause of dental caries, especially when kids are, you know, they're constantly walking around with their sippy cups or bottles and drinking milk through the day. I think less about the protein. I think the other part of the question that you asked is really important, and that is sort of how to manage you know, family, especially grandparents that maybe, you know, not comfortable with the way that parents may be choosing to feed their children. And one of the things that Brenda and I have talked about, and she's really kind of made me sort of be even more aware of, is it's important to remember that this concern comes from a place of love. So that grandparents or other family members that may seem to be sort of offering a lot of obstacles or disagreement, it's really at the core of it is just love and wanting the best for these grandchildren. And so I think it comes down to a mutual conversation grounded in respect. And so rather than, you know, if it's possible with family members, rather than having conflict or a lot of, you know, fighting back and forth, to understand that it is coming from a place of love and concern, and to sort of offer your conversation from that place. And instead of saying, you know, I know what's best for my child, it could come from a place of, I know you're so worried about this, and I really appreciate that. And these are the ways that we are ensuring that, you know, the children are meeting their nutritional needs. And if it becomes impossible to have a respectful conversation that's grounded in compassion, then you may need to sort of make some adjustments. So maybe, you know, at a time when we're all sort of getting together once again after COVID is sort of under control, is maybe, you know, not basing the gatherings around food or offering to bring the food yourself. But I think it is important to try and remember that these concerns do stem from a place of love, for the most part, I'd say.
Absolutely.
Yep, and that's something that all parents, for everything, not just nutrition, that they need to sometimes keep in mind. So we talked about the protein, and we kind of talked about milk. So what about the calcium? Because everybody's trying to give so much cow's milk because it's high in calcium. So what can we do?
Well, I'm going to let Brenda answer it specifically, but in addition to the paper that she talked about from the Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics, sort of reassuring the safety. I think it's much easier to share a paper with a physician or someone that's concerned than a whole book. The other article that we recommend is something that was published just last year called Milk and Health from the New England Journal of Medicine. And it basically, in a very scientific and concise way, talks about all the reasons that we don't need milk in the diet. But in terms of calcium, I know that Brenda can tell us so much more about where we can give our children adequate calcium without giving them cow's milk.
Yeah, because obviously cow's milk is a very concentrated source of calcium. It's in cow's milk for a reason. Little calves grow into pretty big cows in a heck of a rush. So, moose milk is actually even twice as concentrated as cow's milk. But when you think about it from a rational perspective, every species produces a milk that is very, very specifically designed to support the growth of their offspring. And it defies rationality to think for a second that any species would require the milk of another species for their, survival, basically. And so I think that the question is not, do we need calcium? Of course we need calcium. And meeting the RDA in North America is high. It's 700 milligrams for 1 to 3 year olds, and it's 1,000 milligrams for 4 to 8 year olds, which is the same as adults, up to 50 for women, or for men, or for women, and 70 for men. So this is a lot of calcium for a tiny little person. That we're recommending. In Europe, they recommend less, but nonetheless, if we're trying to meet the RDA in North America, to me, the easiest way of doing that is to include a fortified non-dairy milk for your children. So, fortified soy milk, or if you're, getting enough protein elsewhere, you could use a fortified cashew milk for children over the age of 2. But generally, we want to include a good mix of high calcium foods. So one of the very best sources is leafy greens that are low in oxalic acid. So there are some greens that show up on calcium charts as being really high in calcium, like spinach and beet greens and Swiss chard, but they're also very high in oxalic acid. So although they contain a lot of calcium, we can't extract that calcium from the food. And so it's we might get about 5 to 10% of it, if that. But there are other greens like kale and various Chinese greens and broccoli that we absorb, close to 60% of the calcium from those foods. And that's about double what we absorb from cow's milk. So these can be really wonderful sources of calcium. And a lot of parents will say, well, my kids wouldn't eat that much of those foods. But you can do things like making kale chips, for example. They're delicious. Kids will eat a ton of kale chips. So there's ways of incorporating them where they will eat a fair bit. And then there are other foods within every food group. So within the legume group, tofu, read the label. A lot of tofu is very high in calcium. And so legumes like black turtle beans and great northern beans, and there are a number of legumes that are reasonable sources as well. And then in the nuts and seeds sort of category, chia seeds are very high. Almonds, sesame seeds all provide some calcium. And then there are other foods like blackstrap molasses and figs, and even an orange has 60 milligrams. And one of the nice things about plant-based diets is you tend to get calcium from almost everything. So there's very little calcium in meat and poultry and those, fish. If you eat the bones, yes, but if not, then not much. But certainly in plant foods, you get calcium in almost everything. And what's interesting is during childhood, you absorb about, probably 40 to 60% of the calcium in food. And if you're eating little bits of calcium throughout the day, you're actually absorbing even more than if you have a huge bolus of milk all at once. You'll absorb a smaller percentage of the calcium. So, getting calcium from all sorts of little bits of different foods throughout the day is a really good way of doing it. And then adding in those fortified non-dairy milks boosts you. Maybe the child to get 400 or 500 from the variety of foods, but it'll boost the child up to where they need to be if they have, 1 or 2 cups, and 2 cups will give them 600 milligrams easily. Some non-dairy milks actually have about 450 milligrams in a cup. So you can select a milk that is appropriate for your child, depending on their, how much calcium they're getting from their regular diet. And then the other thing to remember with that is it's really important. In order to absorb calcium, you need vitamin D, and vitamin D is it's in eggs and fish, but it's not in a lot of natural plant foods. I mean, if mushrooms are grown in sunlight, you get a little bit. But, and of course, some people, who are exposed to a lot of sunshine will make a fair bit of vitamin D. But for all children, vitamin D is an issue, not just plant-based children, but omnivorous children as well. And so we recommend, all health professionals recommend that babies get a vitamin D supplement, and continuing that supplement into childhood makes really good sense. You don't make any vitamin D in cool months. I live in Canada. It's at least 6 or 8 months of the year that we're not making vitamin D. So it's important that that's provided in order to maximize the health of our bones. And there are lots of other nutrients that are important to bones too, but calcium and vitamin D often come up as being really paramount.
Right. Well, I mean, it seems like that you could probably look at your book and see what the things that you could incorporate in your child's diet. But then you have, some of them that may be, like I said, picky eaters, or maybe they just get full really quickly. So, so maybe a parent might say, well, I think they're getting it. I mean, do you get them tested to see how their nutrient levels are, or what could they do if they weren't sure?
Yeah, so there are some tests that are routine in childhood. So for instance, typically at a year of age, most children are screened for iron deficiency anemia because it's the most common nutrient deficiency worldwide. And that's sort of a standard test that's done. There are instances where we might check a vitamin D level if kids are not routinely taking a supplement or consuming fortified foods. It's important to remember that people think of cow's milk as a good source of vitamin D, but it's fortified. It's added to cow's milk. So I would say typically iron and vitamin D. If you are a family that is consuming B12 consistently and reliably, there's not really a need to specifically test for it. But if you're unsure, there are some specific blood tests that you can do to test for that. Beyond that, I think it's just kind of like a case-by-case basis. I don't think that you can't just go in to check for overall nutrient deficiency. Such a panel doesn't exist. And I think for the kids, I have a lot of empathy for parents that are facing challenges in terms of feeding their children, because even though we may sort of create the most wonderful spread with hummus and veggies and kale chips and all these things, it doesn't really matter if our kids won't eat them. And so we dedicate a lot of time in the book talking about common feeding principles and how to sort of, establish good feeding habits. But I think that Brenda and I are on the same page that if you're really struggling and your kids are not getting, the sufficient nutrients that you think are important, using a good quality multivitamin for a little bit of added insurance is absolutely not only reasonable, but recommended. And then, of course, if you're really concerned and unsure, then working with a dietitian that is experienced in plant-based diets and vegan and vegetarian nutrition for at least an initial consult is not unreasonable, but it's certainly not required.
Mm-hmm.
So speaking of, did you want to say something, Brenda?
No, go ahead.
Oh, well, I was thinking when you were talking about the supplements, which I think, all the things that you're talking about, I'm reflecting back. Okay, if I, way back when I was raising my kids, what would I have done? And as careful as I am, I probably would have just supplemented just to be on the safe side. And there are some certain plant-based doctors, at least that I've interviewed or listened to, and some of them are concerned with folic acid in the vitamins, right?
Mm-hmm.
So what do you have to say about that?
Yeah, there are a couple of different forms of folate. So folate is the form of the vitamin that you find in food. So in the leafy greens and in the beans and in the oranges and all of the foods that contain folate. And then there's another form of folate that is a synthetic form. It's called folic acid. And folic acid is metabolized a little differently than folate. And so it is possible that your body can't handle amounts above a certain amount without it potentially causing some adverse consequences to health. So just so you know, there is an upper limit for folic acid. There is no upper limit for folate. You can eat as much folate in foods as, you know, in whole foods as your heart desires. But with folic acid, generally for an adult, for example, you're not going to want to be getting much more than 1,000 micrograms a day. And that's interesting because in pregnancy and lactation, the RDA is well, during pregnancy is 600 micrograms. And so if you get that in a supplement, plus you're eating fortified foods and smooth, you know, these drinks with added nutrients, you could easily exceed the 1,000 micrograms. And so there's a couple of things people can do. I think it's more important, and this I feel strongly about, it's more important that you get the folic acid you need during pregnancy than avoiding folic acid. I mean, you want to make sure through folate or folic acid, you're getting enough of that nutrient, because insufficient amounts of folate or folic acid are very strongly associated with neural tube defects. So you want to make sure you get enough, but generally you can get enough from folate. There are also, but this is and Reshma might want to talk a little bit to this, but there are a lot of supplements available that contain folate from foods as opposed to folic acid. And for people that can afford those, that may be an option if you're concerned about potential, you know, side effects of too much folic acid. But most of the free prenatals are folic acid.
Dr. Shah, did you want to?
Yeah, I would just add that I think a lot of it comes down to what people have access to in terms of either what they can afford or what their insurance policies may cover. And during these key, potentially vulnerable periods, such as during pregnancy, it is absolutely important to make sure that you have sufficient folate through supplementation. I don't think you can 100% say, oh, I'm just going to eat a balanced diet and that'll take care of it, because we know that oftentimes in the first trimester of pregnancy, it's with, you know, morning sickness and nausea, it's sometimes difficult to get in the foods that we may want that would include those key nutrients. One of the things that I've been seeing that's kind of reassuring and encouraging is there have been a variety of companies that are developing and selling vitamins geared towards the plant-based eaters. And so it will contain nutrients like B12 and vitamin D and things that we tend to have more difficulty in terms of meeting. So I think the most important thing is to ensure that during those vulnerable key times that you're getting the nutrients. And if your insurance company only covers a prenatal vitamin with folic acid and that's all you can afford and have access to, it's more important to do that than to skip it altogether.
I agree.
If you have a choice, there's certainly so many different varieties of supplements and nutrients and vitamins that you can take, and you need to just do a little bit of research and make sure that it's a reputable company and all of that stuff. And a lot of these vitamins nowadays are vegan entirely, so you can definitely find them. But again, if access or affordability is an issue, make sure you're just meeting your requirements.
Well, that makes a lot of sense. So another supplement that I've been reading about and hearing about is the EPA DHA. And I always thought it was so weird that the doctor would say to eat fish, and then like if you get a can of tuna and it would say pregnant women should limit their intake of it. And anytime I think, you know, if a pregnant woman should limit their intake, well, then maybe everybody should. But what about DHA EPA?
Yeah, and I'll let Brenda talk about the specifics, but I think that with certain nutrients like B12 and vitamin D, it's kind of like there's not a lot of room for debate. It's like easy to know that we need those in our diet, either in fortified foods or supplements for overall health. with the omega-3s, we're learning more, and increasingly, I think people are recognizing that there is a role, especially again during those vulnerable times, so during pregnancy, during lactation, and early infancy. Sometimes, I'll let Brenda talk about the specifics, but oftentimes people just want to know, well, what do you do? Do you take them? And the approach in our family is, I think I feel convinced enough that we do an algae-based omega-3 supplement several times a week. So I'm not as adamant as I am about B12, but we try to include some of it in our on a weekly basis.
Mm-hmm. So just to set the stage for this, there are two essential fatty acids, alpha-linolenic acid and linoleic acid, and one is an omega-3, and that's alpha-linolenic acid. EPA and DHA are not considered, I guess they're considered conditionally essential. So technically, the human body is able to elongate and desaturate alpha-linolenic acid, the omega-3 plant omega-3 you get from flax and chia and hemp seeds and walnuts and all of that, into EPA and DHA, but the conversion is not that efficient. And some people with hypertension, with diabetes, don't convert very well. Women of childbearing age tend to convert much more efficiently. Children probably as well, but there's still so much we don't know. What we do know is these compounds, EPA is a precursor for all sorts of eicosanoids and resolvents and protectants and all of these things that affect all sorts of body systems. And it seems to be that we are at reduced risk for certain issues like, our cognitive function decline and that sort of thing, if we have better status of EPA and DHA. And what we know is that vegans have lower EPA and DHA status, and it tends to be somewhere around, a third to a half of what omnivores have. And is that an issue? It may be, we're not positive. We still know vegans have lower rates of heart disease, lower rates of several cancers, lower rates of diabetes. We still do well, but could we do even better if we had better EPA DHA status? And it seems like it's possible in some respects that it just makes sense to first of all take steps to ensure that we are converting the plant omega-3s well. And that means not overdoing omega-6 fatty acids because they compete against omega-3. So people that are using a lot of sunflower and safflower and corn oil, this can depress the conversion of those omega-3 fatty acids. We want to make sure the diet is nutritionally adequate. We want to make sure that we're not eating too many saturated fats and trans fatty acids. Those can impair conversion. There are all sorts of little things that can, impair conversion. So we want to make sure that we do the best we can to convert appropriately. All of that having been said, I still think that it makes good sense based on what we know and the evidence we have to date to include a reasonable amount of EPA and DHA. And the thing to understand again is that most of the EPA and DHA that's found in fish is made by plants. They're called microalgae. And when we take fish and, make fish oils or we eat fish, we are really compromising the ecosystem. Right now, they're estimating that by 2050, most of the fish stocks in the oceans will be gone. We'll have to be farming fish. That's it. So it makes so much more sense for human beings to culture the microalgae and extract the EPA and DHA that might be of benefit from those plants as opposed to eating the fish, in my view. And the other thing you had sort of alluded to, Amy, was about, the levels of contaminants. So fish are the most concentrated source of mercury. And of course, it's the large predatory fish that are more of a problem. So for example, orange roughy and king mackerel and swordfish and shark and those kinds of big fish. But there are also some types like bluefin tuna and what's the other one? Big eye tuna that are particularly an issue. So the light flake tuna is not as big of an issue as those other types. But generally, this is a source of mercury, which is a neurotoxin, and fish is also a source of other persistent organic pollutants like dioxins, for example. And so certainly that's something to be aware of. And again, I think it just makes sense to include a little bit of EPA DHA, and it's not a very difficult thing to do. It's not that expensive. But it is an option. I think as a parent, I would provide my child with a little bit. And of course, in Nourish, we provide very specific guidelines about how much is needed at each, stage of the life cycle. So for children.
Both say that the nutrient requirements vary from all stages of life. I know we're just talking about the pregnant and lactating and the children, but it goes all the way up to middle age and beyond, as far as how people absorb things and how they process these different nutrients. And so children develop so quickly, and their body weight changes and so forth, and having those helpful charts that you have in the book, so that you can just always be sure that you're right on track, instead of having to worry about contacting a registered dietitian or the physician, especially after the baby is a year old. You're not going as frequently to the doctor, hopefully, because hopefully it's just well checkups and so forth. So and hopefully, because you're not feeding your child dairy, that perhaps you won't have as many ear infections as many of the omnivores seem to have. So having those charts, I mean, it's invaluable. Just having that book, that you can just hold on to that book throughout the development of your child into the teens and so forth, and always be able to just open it up and reference and say, am I doing the right thing here? And just having that reassurance to know, when you don't have access to too many doctors that are familiar with this lifestyle, or registered dietitians that are familiar with this lifestyle, just having that to know that you're doing it right. It's invaluable, and I'm sure that a lot of people are very, very grateful, and I'm so anxious to spread the news about this book, because it is definitely something that's important. We had some people email some questions, and one of the moms, Rachel, she said that right now she's breastfeeding, and she's following the plant-based diet, and her child isn't quite ready for the table food yet, but she is finding that her milk supply is low. Is that has something to do with diet, or is this something that you can tell her?
Yeah, I mean, I think certainly meeting with a lactation consultant could be useful. And I think it depends on how old the child is and how far along they are in breastfeeding. And just maintaining overall good nutrition for mom, making sure she's getting an adequate source of calories and staying well hydrated. Oftentimes even stress and anxiety. I've seen plenty of moms, like, the stress that breastfeeding isn't going well interferes with breastfeeding. So again, as Brenda sort of mentioned earlier on, the most important thing is the proper growth and well-being of the child. So if the child is experiencing a fall in growth, then I think it would be worth sort of consulting with the pediatrician, meeting with a lactation consultant, seeing what they can do to sort of enhance the milk supply. The lactation consultants, in my opinion, they are some of those skilled, useful people in the newborn and early infancy period, because they just have a wealth of I find them to be one of the most compassionate groups of healthcare providers. They're just so nurturing, and so don't be afraid to seek out support. But I think the two places I would start is meet with a lactation consultant, make sure mom is eating enough calories, because I think oftentimes, I think sometimes new moms put a lot of pressure on themselves to sort of do it all. They're working, they're managing the household, and you can neglect your own nutrition, and you can't feed baby properly if mom is not fed properly. Those are the first two places I would start. And then, if you need to do some additional formula or other things to sort of make sure that the child is growing adequately, there's no problem with it. Like there doesn't need to be any sort of guilt or bad feelings, because again, you just want to make sure that mom and baby are both doing well.
Mm-hmm. And then the only things I would add are a lot of women are desperate to lose weight when they're breastfeeding, and breastfeeding itself will help with weight loss. But if you go overboard, you may not get enough, and you certainly need to make sure you're drinking enough liquid. The other thing what was the other thing? I think it's just super important that you remember that by 6 months of age, the baby needs calories from solid foods. And so a lot of people are thinking, well, if 6 months is good, maybe 8 months is better to exclusively breastfeed. And that is a bad idea. The baby needs an exogenous source of or some other source of iron than breast milk by 4 months of age. Often the American Academy of Pediatrics recommends that they get iron drops, a milligram per kilogram at about 4 months of age, until they get enough from solid foods. And solid foods need to be started at 6 months and no later. It may be, there are guidelines to when baby's ready for solids, and it may be a week or two later for some children, but generally 6 months is it. You need to be starting. Babies need more calories than what they're getting from breast milk by that age.
Well, that's great. And there again, your book is going to be invaluable, because it's just, we're just regular people, and we don't have all this knowledge, and just to be able to look up, here's the age of my child, what should I be thinking about, and what do I need to make sure that I'm doing, and instead of listening to this interview or others like it and trying to scratch out notes and find them, they'll just have a whole comprehensive book, Nourish, and it's going to give them everything that they need.
One of the things that I would just add, though, is I think that Brenda and I sort of view ourselves as consultants. So we are there to sort of guide and support. But really, the true expert is the parent, because no one knows your child as well as you do. So we are so happy to provide a guide and a resource and information. But I think a parent's intuition is one of the most powerful tools that a family has, and trust that intuition.
Yeah, I think you're right about that.
Yeah.
That they somehow have a better sense of where their child is at. Well, the time is really flying by. I think I have some more email questions and comments, but let's try and take some of the live ones and see what we have. So, Erin Gigi, what brand is good for quality vitamin?
I think it really varies a lot depending on where you live. Like, I know that the supplements and vitamins that are available in Canada or Europe are different than in the US. And a lot of it actually comes down to affordability. Some of the plant-based ones that I've seen are Complement makes an organic vegan vitamin. They have drops for infants, and then capsules for older children and adults. I think there are Nordic Naturals is another brand that I've heard that people often use. So I think you just have to do a little research. And Brenda and I don't really have one specific supplement brand that we recommend. So I think
in Canada we have Whole Earth and Sea. I like that one. It's a sort of a whole food-based supplement. And then of course Joel Furman has a whole line of supplements that are very well put together. So there are a number of companies that have a pretty nice line of vegan supplements. So, yeah, I'm not as familiar with all of the ones in the United States.
Well, I'm sure we have Canada viewers, so that's nice to know. And being that the supplement industry isn't very well regulated, or at all, I guess, so it's nice to have a little input from you guys to at least point us in the direction, because we want to make sure that the supplements we're consuming actually have what the label says they have, because they're so important to us. Let's see. Angelita. Hi, Angelita. Thanks for watching or listening. At what age can we introduce solid foods to children? What should we introduce first, and how much? My nephew's 3 months old, and formula isn't satisfying him enough.
Yeah, 3 months is a bit early to be starting solid foods. So the recommendations really are exclusive breastfeeding to 6 months of age. And, these are sort of guideposts, but if it's like a week or so off, you don't need to stress about it. But typically by 6 months, 6 months is sort of the late end of introducing solid foods, and absolutely no earlier than 4 months. And I would push it as closer to the 6 month mark, especially if you're exclusively breastfeeding. 3 months is a little bit too early. And the risk in terms of introducing solid foods too early, there's some potential risk of increased risk of food allergies. But the most important thing that I would be concerned about actually is just like choking. They don't have the oral motor skills to be able to handle solid foods at that age. And in the book, we talk about what the key factors are in terms of looking to see the readiness of child. And in terms of that sort of feeling of satisfaction, I think you just might have to be a little bit more curious because as kids get older, their amount of formula does increase. So a 2-month-old is going to require less formula than a 3-month-old, than a 4-month-old, than a 6-month-old. So you may need to sort of increase it. And if you're really concerned, then absolutely check in with your pediatrician to make sure that the growth parameters are aligning.
Yes, and babies need to be fed often. So yeah. That's the other thing to bear in mind, that he just might need to be having his formula more often.
Yeah. Right. And I think maybe some of the formulas may have some sweetener in them, maybe. So maybe it might spike. I'm not a physician. I'm just kind of thinking it out loud that maybe the glucose level might spike and then come down.
Well, it's actually designed to match breast milk as close to breast milk as possible. So the amount of sugar in formula would be very similar to the amount in breast milk.
Wow.
Breast milk has lots of sugar.
Yeah.
It's sweet. Well, and it's high in fat. It's about 50 to 55% of calories from fat. So that.
And then the person also asked about what foods to introduce first. And we recommend, as Brenda mentioned, at around 4 months of age, babies' iron stores are starting to decline. So we really recommend using iron-rich foods as first foods, just so you make sure that you're introducing an adequate source of iron. So something like a fortified infant cereal. We stay away from rice cereal, but like an oat or other kind of infant cereal will be a great first food to start. And then you just kind of have fun with it. Let it be a little bit of an experiment. I think exposing baby to a variety of foods, and I think it's, looking back now that my kids are older, it's just such a fun and exciting time, to see their facial expressions. And so make sure you're including an iron-rich food to start off with, and then just try and have some fun and experiment and explore and enjoy it.
And Brenda, did you want to add to that?
I just agree. I agree completely. It is one of the most exciting times, and children, you get excited about food and they'll get excited about food. So just to make it a joyful experience. And we, one of the things that Reshma and I often talk about, and we talk about in our book, is there's a division of responsibility where feeding is concerned. And that division of responsibility is, as parents, we're responsible sort of for the what, the when, and the where of eating. So we're going to be having peas and potatoes and tofu at 5 o'clock at the dinner table. And children are responsible for how much they're going to eat and whether they're going to eat at all. Children won't starve themselves, but that division of responsibility really helps to make meals a more pleasant experience. Anything to add, Reshma?
No, I think that's so right. And I think the earlier you start with these principles, the easier it is. You're just sort of setting the stage for a lifetime of, just joyful, healthful eating and connecting around the dinner tables. I think that's such a critical part of the whole feeding experience.
Okay, I think I saw another, Jessie T. Thanks for watching. What's something that you wish all of your patients knew about a plant-based lifestyle? I guess that would be for Dr. Shah.
I would say that you don't have to be perfect. Like, you just, whatever pace and whatever sort of practices feel comfortable and doable for your family, just begin there. And sometimes I think as parents, we put a lot of pressure on ourselves to get everything just perfectly done. And focus on enjoyment, focus on making sure that the nutritional bases are covered, and focus around joy at your dinner table. And don't worry about being perfect. It's not possible.
Yeah, we learned that maybe in the 5th or 6th decade of our life.
And then you just scream from the rooftops. It's not possible. Let go of it. You'll save yourself a lot of grief.
What did you want to add anything to that, Brenda?
I guess the thing that I would love to say is also, you're not alone. Seek support, join communities, and educate yourself as much as possible. Read books, watch videos, and just get engaged and connected with your plant-based community, because I think it makes things a whole lot easier. And even for your children, when they, when you go to potlucks and once, we can do that sort of stuff again. And when children connect with other children that are also plant-based, it's so much fun for them. So I think connection is really important.
Okay, I just want to have some nice things that just people are saying that we'll post up. VB, thanks for a great interview. Thanks for watching.
Thanks,
Mary Riley, appreciative of this superb sharing of nutrition. So needed. Thanks for watching, Mary. Let's see if there's anything else. Okay. Oh, Mary also wants to know #1 natural supplements in US. Oh, she's saying that, I don't know if you've heard of Shaklee. I guess they're available in Canada, so that might be something that people might want to look into. I'm not familiar with them, but I'm going to look into them too. Okay, so I think that at this point, I wanted to, well, first I want to talk about our next guest that's coming up. And we have our guest, and that is going to be Dr. Joel Kahn, and he is a plant-based cardiologist. And he's going to have not just questions about heart disease, but he sees a lot of patients with diabetes and osteoporosis and the full gamut. So if you have any questions about any health concerns and how a plant-based lifestyle can affect those concerns, tune in, and that's going to be a really great interview. And I also wanted to take this time to thank somebody who's been engineering in the background. That's Rebecca from PKA Solves. She has been orchestrating this whole pop in, pop out window while I get to enjoy the interview instead of having to navigate those things. And I also wanted to thank Jessie from Tasse Voice. She did the countdown and the voiceover. She's also been doing a lot of the social media as well, which has been very, very helpful. But most of all, I wanted to thank you guys, the ones that are watching and listening. And we talked about before how, with the way that the internet works and you're watching, the more time you spend, not just me, anybody that's doing a broadcast like this, or when you, go online and buy the Nourish book, all these are just votes for this lifestyle, which helps other people discover it, because the more it's voted for by your purchases and by your clicks and likes, the more likely it's going to come up in searches on the internet. And so that's really important. So even now, if you didn't make a comment because you didn't have a question or whatever, you can click like, click share, click subscribe. You can just say hi, or you can follow along with me and Dr. Shah and Brenda as we say to you, until we see you guys again, be strong, be well, and be green. Bye.
And we're live with Be Green with Amy.